on page 35a. We just started the new chapter, chapter 6 of the Tractate Brachas, page 35a. And the Mishnah that we learned was talking all about the blessings on food. And so it started with the bracha on fruits of a tree. And of course, the bracha, we all know, Bayrei Pri Ha'etz. But that there is an exception, and that is when it comes to wine. Wine gets its own blessing. As Rashi told us, it has a certain significance, importance to it, and it gets its own bracha, Bayrei Pri Hagafen. And on fruit from the earth, Peiros Haaretz, so it really seems to be a machlekes in Mishnah, is the bracha Bayrei Pri Ha'adama, or do you divide all the fruits of the earth, which means vegetables, into different categories, and each one gets a bracha of its own, as our Mishnah concludes that Rabbi Yehuda says on Yerakos, like green herbage, you would recite a bracha Bayrei Mine Deshaim, and who creates the different types of herbage. So the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda is that you need to specify each bracha more, each part of the vegetable bracha. In other words, each category. And Rabbi Yehuda later on in the Gemara, much later in the chapter, will also mention that there's a third category, which is a blessing for seeds, for zroim, for seeds, I guess, like sunflower seeds and so on, and he has a bracha for that as well. So the point of Rabbi Yehuda is that you have to specify the bracha in the bracha which category it is regarding vegetables. And the Mishnah did say that there is an exception to this rule with regard to grain, with regard to bread, because bread, you do not recite a Bayrei Pri Ha'adama, but instead it also is similar to wine. It gets a bracha on its own, and that is the bracha Hamoitzi Lechem Min Haaretz. So that's the Mishnah. Yes, Ben.
What about the seven minim?
The 7 minim are part of the tree. Some of them are trees and some of them are grain.
Right, but I thought there was a separate blessing for each min. On Sukkot, or was it?
There is a special bracha that you recite at the end, after bracha for them. There is a special after bracha.
Oh, after?
It's similar,
okay.
Yeah, similar to Al Hamichya, and you recite that for even fruits. When it comes to the 7 species. Yes, Robert. We can't hear you. I don't know why. You're not muted, but it's hard to, but there's no sound. Okay. Somehow there's no sound. Maybe your sound is low. I don't know what that could be.
Disconnected.
Yeah. Well, at least you can hear us, so that's good, I guess. Okay. So we're gonna so the Gemara. Let's go over the Gemara that we learned, and as I mentioned, it is a little confusing Gemara. The Gemara is trying to figure out the source for reciting brachas, and the source for reciting brachas obviously is not so clear, because we see the Gemara is struggling to know, how do we, what the source is. Where does it say that you have to recite a bracha before you eat? And the only source that we have, the official source of a bracha is v'achalta v'savato v'rachta, which it says, we understand that it refers to the grace after meal, that you eat a meal of bread, that you recite a bracha afterwards. So that's the source that we know. If someone is to ask you, how do you know you recite, which bracha do we know of? So there is a biblical source of a bracha which we which is the bracha for benching grace after meal, that's considered biblical, a biblical obligation. Now, the biblical obligation applies if a person is satisfied. We sometimes recite the grace after meal and we're not fully satisfied, but as long as you ate a kezias, an olive size, you would still recite that bracha. That would be a rabbinic fulfillment, a rabbinic obligation to recite but the biblical obligation would be if a person ate bread and was satisfied, then they would have a biblical obligation to recite a bracha afterwards. The only other source that the Gemara seems to find here for a bracha is that it says regarding the law of the fourth year fruit, it does say this is a holy fruit of praises to God. And the Gemara understands that sounds like it's a source. You're supposed to recite blessings. You're supposed to recite praises when you enjoy that fourth year fruit. That's how the Gemara is understanding it. Later on, we'll see that the Gemara is not so satisfied with this explanation. But in the initial stage of the Gemara, what we learned yesterday is that the idea that a person is that the Torah calls this fourth year fruit praises, it's holy and praises of Hashem. So it sounds like you are supposed to recite praises before consuming these foods. Yes, Susan.
Why is the fourth year of the fruit so significant? Why not the first year?
Oh, so the first 3 years we're not allowed to eat any of those.
Anything
any fruit. So if you have a mango tree, if you plant a mango tree for 3 years, you're not allowed to eat the fruits. It's called arla. After the 3 years, then it's considered the fourth year fruit. In Israel, it's called meta revoy. It's the fourth year of plants. You would have to bring those to Jerusalem.
And that includes vegetables also?
No, fruits. This only applies to
fruits. Okay.
And you would bring them to Jerusalem and rejoice with them. Now, the Gemara that we learned here yesterday also mentioned that there is a view that it only applies to grapes, the fourth year fruit, and it doesn't apply to anything else. There is such a view that the fourth year that you have to rejoice in Jerusalem only applies to kerem, a vineyard, or that would be the only obligation. Robert, do we hear you now?
No, can you hear me? I don't know.
Yes.
I don't.
Yes.
No. Yes. Okay, good.
We can hear you.
Well, I'm sorry. All right, you're good. So listen, the one thing that I was curious about, but I think I answered it myself, is when you talked about seeds. I mean, there's a difference between eating a seed, but also planting seeds, and there's got to be a bracha for when you plant seeds. So that must be on a different category.
I don't know about planting a bracha when you plant. I'm not familiar with any bracha of when you plant. There is a prayer when a person harvests. There is some type of a prayer that a person says on their harvest, but it's not a bracha. It's like a yehi ratzon. It's like a may it be your will type of a prayer. But are you with us? I just saw you flip.
Yeah, no, I'm here, but I'm driving, and so things keep falling apart on me. But I'm here. I'm here with you.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Concentrate on the road.
I am.
Okay. Good. Okay. So yeah. So yeah. As far as I know, there's no blessing. I mean, I'm not a farmer, but as far as I know, there's no blessing on planting. Susan, you were in the middle of your question, so I just want to go back to you and make sure we answered everything.
I have just one other question. If you have a fruit tree, the first year that it fruits is the best, and after that, it's no good.
Okay, so this is the thing. The first year that you're talking about, the first year that it gives off fruit, could be the fifth year that since you planted it. So the Gemara is talking about the first 3 years from planting. The first 3 years from planting, many trees don't even give any fruit. And even in the fourth year, not necessarily are they giving off fruit. So the point is that if you're telling me that you've tasted fruits and they taste really good in the first year, I'm not sure what you mean, if you mean the first year from planting or the first year, the first produce that comes out of the tree. But either way, however it works, whether it's good or not, we are not allowed to eat it in the first 3 years. The fourth year is where in Israel, when they actually, it's interesting to note, when you go to Israel, there is a special rabbinic supervision on all the fruit stores. The fruit stores have rabbinic supervision. Here in America, there is no such thing. You go to Publix or Walmart and Aldi's, and you can buy any fruit that you want. And the question is why? Maybe it's from the first 3 years. How do you know it's not from the first 3 years? But the law is that we don't have to suspect it. And outside of Israel, we don't have to suspect that it's from the first 3 years. But in Israel, you do. And in Israel, you would need to, it would be a questionable biblical obligation to make sure that it's not from the first 3 years. So the rabbis have to go to the orchards where they're harvesting to make sure that the fruits are not, that they're not selling fruits that are from the first 3 years. Now, the fourth year, there's an argument in our Gemara if it needs to be, if all produce needs to be brought to Jerusalem, or if and enjoyed there, celebrating that the new crop, or if it only applies to a vineyard. But that's our Gemara, and we'll see a little more about that. Yes, David. One second, David had his hand up for a while. David.
Yeah, you're asking about a biblical source for
blessing.
for the blessings. What about Hakaras HaTov? Is that a biblical source for mitzvah of recognizing a person's good? It's a mitzvah to do Hakaras HaTov.
So, which verse are you thinking of?
I don't know. I'm asking you. I'm hoping that you know the biblical source of each mitzvah.
Right.
And that mitzvah is probably from the Torah. I don't know what Rambam's enumeration, but it would seem like it's a good source for making a blessing.
Right.
It's Hakaras HaTov a mitzvah?
It sounds like an interesting thought, David. I have to think through, the verses and the cases, the scenarios where we have like Hakaras HaTov. I mean, I guess v'achalta v'savata uveirachta is sort of like a Hakaras HaTov. Higadati hayoim, or maybe like the bikur, when you would bring the vidui bikurim, or I guess when you would do the vidui of at the end of the fourth year, you do a vidui meiser. So you sort of are thanking Hashem, or the Haggadah, the V'yigadat Levincha. These are all thanks of Yetzias Mitzrayim and other things, but none of them seem to include a clear obligation of a bracha. So I don't know. Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I have to think about it more. Yes, Isaac. Isaac?
I've already forgotten the question I had. Oh, yes. When you say the first 3 years, from the time you plant it, or the first 3 years of fruit blossoming on the tree?
No, so it's from planting, but it's not exact, actually. I shouldn't really say from planting because it's not so exact. It's from...
It's from when it shows. It comes up and it starts to show.
The first year, it starts 2 weeks after it's planted. And as long as there's more than a month left to the first year, that's already fulfillment of the first year of the 3 years. So as long as you plant it before Tu B'Av, if I'm not mistaken, that's considered already 1 year went by.
Yes.
Once Rosh Hashanah comes. So because we consider 30 days in the first year to be considered the first year, as long as it was planted 2 weeks before Elul. So if I'm not mistaken, so you have 44 days basically would make it considered a year went by. So there is a way of minimizing those 3
I guess
years.
what I was asking is, we're talking about from the time you put the seed in the ground or shortly thereafter.
Right.
We're not talking about when the branches come up and then finally the first year that you see actual fruits.
Correct. Yeah, that's what I was mentioning to Susan, that even if she says that it tastes very good, it could be that was the 5th year from the planting. It's just the first year that it gave off fruit, so it could be that it's fine the first year that it gave off fruit, because we go by the planting. Correct, Isaac. Okay, Ben.
I wanted to say, even for that, there is a way that you can, if you decide that you want to eat that fruit, or you're hungry and want to eat that fruit, you can decide and say, well, it's worth $2, the apple. I'll pay $2 when I get to Jerusalem and buy another apple and then substitute it. Are you familiar with that?
Right. The thing is that it's not that when you in Israel, you don't do that. And the reason you're not going to do that.
You can do it. And when you get to Jerusalem, you can substitute the food that you buy for that money.
The thing is that we don't, nowadays, this law is not done exactly as it was done in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, in a time when people were pure. And the laws are not exactly the same as we're learning here, because we actually don't bring the 4th fruit to Israel. We will nullify it on a coin or on a dollar or on money. Yeah. But again, the reason why you wouldn't want to do that is because the only issue that you're fulfilling, that you're dealing with, is the 4th year produce issue. But you're not dealing with the fact that there might be other, in other words, there might be other obligations that the rabbis are fulfilling, and you're not doing that. In other words, you're taking a fruit and saying, well, maybe it's the 4th year fruit. I have no problem, but it might be the first 3 years. So it doesn't help to switch it on money. And it might be a truma fruit. It might be truma was never separated, or meiser. So you want to rely on the rabbinic supervision rather than trying to take matters in your own hand, because you're only answering one of the numerous obligations that the rabbis are covering, and you might not be covering. So that's why it's not, it's not so practical. And then the second thing is that we don't actually take the fruit nowadays to Israel, to Jerusalem. They put it on money, and then they throw the coin in the Dead Sea or something. But it's not, it has to be done properly. It's not just when I get to Israel, when I get to Jerusalem, I'll pay $1 for a fruit. It has to be eaten in purity, whatever.
I don't think they can throw it into the Dead Sea. You can throw it into the Yam HaMelech, into the Mediterranean or the Yarden, but not the Dead Sea. It'll float.
A coin? A coin will float?
It will disintegrate.
I don't know. I'm just saying, there's a good chance anything you throw in there comes back up.
Well, I think the term is the Zarka Yam HaMelech. I think that is the term.
Right.
Anyway, okay. Ezra, yes.
I think that the reason why there are special, brachot basically comes from the hekesh, from the connection between the definition of what the 7 species are and the ve'achalta b'savata u'varachta. And so therefore anything that comes from those 7 species do have a special bracha that's made.
What do you mean? What bracha do they make?
Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, which is a separate bracha. The fact that you say ala mechia v'ala gefen al priya gefen. These are all separate brachot that are only made for the 7 species.
Okay.
That's, I think.
So the after, you're saying the after bracha is a special bracha for the 7 species. The after bracha.
Well, you were saying also that for the geffen and for the bread.
Yeah, but those are obviously not a special bracha because of the 7 species. Those are a special bracha for a different reason. Because if it was because of the 7 species, you would have to recite such a bracha on dates and on pomegranates, on figs, on olives, on, it would necessitate a special bracha. Also, the bracha on bread is only when it's made into bread. It's not on wheat. It's not on zayna. You know what I mean? It's not on other things. So I don't know that that there is a special bracha before, but you're right. There is a special bracha afterwards, and that you're correct about. There's a special bracha as the after bracha on the 7 species, and the source of that bracha, which could be ve'achalta v'savata uveirachta, could be that it's ve'achalta v'savata uveirachta. It could be going on the 7 species, because the verse that it talks about, going to the land of Israel, and it mentions the land of Israel is blessed with 7 species, and then maybe like 2 verses later, it says v'achalta v'savata uveirachta, you will eat and be satisfied and you will say the grace after meal. Now, that grace after meal either is referring to eating a meal or it's referring to eating the 7 species. So that same verse is either referring to a meal benching, a benching, a blessing after the meal, or it's referring to saying the grace after the 7 species, which is a much smaller blessing. But that is a thought that the Gemara is going to consider. Of course, the common view after the conclusion of this Gemara is that we don't recite a biblical blessing after the 7 species. It's not biblical. It's only rabbinic after the 7 species or after anything. The only thing that it's biblical to recite a bracha afterwards is on a actual meal. But thank you, Ezra, for bringing that up about the 7 species. Okay, so just to go conclude, to go over the Gemara and finish what we did yesterday. So we mentioned that one source of a bracha, or at least in the initial thought of the Gemara, is that it says Kodesh Hilulim LaHashem, that the 4th year is a praises to Hashem. So now what we have here is, of course, it makes sense that it's logical that when God gave us the land of Israel, and now we're going to be able to benefit from the land. So the 4th year is a time to actually thank Hashem, because Hashem gave us this land and we're able to grow produce on it. And so it's logical to thank Hashem. And the verse says, Hilulim LaHashem, it is a time of praise. So that would imply that there is a blessing, but not only one blessing, but the word Hilulim is a plural. So it sounds like a multiple blessing, more than one, 2, at least 2 blessings. So this 2 blessings would refer to the blessing before food and the blessing after food. And Rabbi Akiva says, from here you see that you're not allowed to taste anything before one recites a bracha. That reciting a bracha, you would need to, before you even taste, which we explained yesterday means even less than a kazayas, even less than an amount that you normally eat, but just tasting it, that itself, that already would obligate you for a blessing. And then the Gemara asks that the word Hilulim, it seems to be used for other teachings. And if that's so, then we cannot take the word Hilulim to teach us about the blessing before and after food, because the word Hilulim is coming to teach us 2 major laws. And so what the Gemara is going to try to do is figure out if maybe we don't need the word Hilulim for both of these laws. If we don't need the word Hilulim for both of these laws, maybe we could use one of the Hilulims, one of the praises that it's mentioning in the verse, to teach us the obligation of reciting a blessing. So we have the word Hilulim implies two blessings. The Gemara is going to say we need these two teachings for other things. And the Gemara is going to try to say, no, maybe only one of them is necessary. So let's figure out what the specifics of the Gemara are. So the Gemara says that what are the 2 things that we need the word Hilulim to teach us? One of them is that you first need to remove the holiness, redeem the produce in order to be able to eat it outside of Jerusalem. So you want to eat it outside of Jerusalem. So what do you need to do? You have to deconsecrate it. You have to change the food over for money. And then the money becomes the sort of like holy, consecrated, and the food is now eligible to be eaten outside of Jerusalem. So that's one teaching of Hilulim, that it can be, that it's Hilulim, that it has to be deconsecrated. That was one of the teachings. Yes, Susan?
I do not understand that. I don't understand how you can transfer the holiness of something that's grown in the ground into money. I don't understand that.
Right. So it's a verse. The verse teaches us that that's allowed. So the obligation of eating that orange in Jerusalem is not exact for that orange. It could be transferred to money, and money could be transferred. That money you could take to Jerusalem and buy a potato, and then you could eat the potato with it. And so therefore it is allowed. It's accepted in other words, we don't understand. You don't know what holiness is anyway. Do you? Do you see something that's holy? So how do you know that it can't be transferred? These are not things that we can perceive.
Okay.
Yes, David.
When you say that, now I get it.
Okay, David.
Yeah, to answer Susan's question, that the thing is that if the holiness stays with the produce and the produce rots before the person gets to Jerusalem, that's a big problem. So in order to have people have their produce not rot before they bring it to Jerusalem, the mitzvah is that you can transfer it to money that will stay fresh, and then you can redeem that money for produce in Jerusalem. So it's in order that the food shouldn't go bad, and that's why Hashem gave that mitzvah, that ability.
That's a good explanation, David. I don't know if that's the only, if you could say that's the reason. Maybe. Do you know for a fact that is the reason why it's allowed to be transferred?
I heard Rabbi Gordon explain it in Rambam of the Day.
That's the reason, or that's the practical application?
That's maybe the practical application, that people would be arriving in Jerusalem with all this rotten fruit, rotten produce. So Hashem gave the ability in the mitzvah to transfer the holiness from the fruit to the money. Right,
because Bikurim we don't transfer. So it's not like it's an automatic that in order for but that would be a good practical application. Yes, Ezra.
How about if we say Hashem told us to do so, so accept it?
Well, that was my answer.
Yes. And so therefore you don't need an explanation.
But if you have one, why not find one?
Because
as the rabbi has proven to you, it doesn't exactly fit.
Rabbi.
So I'm not disagreeing that it is one of the interests of the scholars was always to look into and find reasons, like in the Rambam in his Meir Nevuchim and the Chinuch, the Sefer HaChinuch. They do try to find reasons, and it's very good. I'm just mentioning that I just want to make sure that if you're saying it, if it's the correct reason or it's a thought, it should be just clarified if you've seen this written or if it's a thought. That's all. But I think it's good to try to look deeper into it, and if there is a reason, for sure to share it. Yes, Moshe.
This is the substitution of kedusha for money. I mean, it is quite overwhelming for me to even understand that, because what other cases is that allowed? I mean, to be able to substitute kedusha for monetary.
Well, it's all the time. All the items that were donated to the temple use. Not
but
as
also,
I know
substituting it. You're just transferring it. You're just transferring it temporarily until you get other fruits to then consume in Yerushalayim.
But
you're not just
also
cashing out. That money needs to be used.
During Pesach,
it's still. I mean, you have it all the time. Oh, anyone that donates, I'll give you an example. You donate money to your local shul, right? So that money, what are you? Oh, it's holy. I can't. It's money meant for the shul. We're not allowed to, and yet what do they do with that money? They go and buy a kiddush with it. They go and buy food with money. You're transferring money to food and money to electric bill, and you're transferring money to fix a roof. You're going to pay with that
Rabbi,
money.
Rabbi, there's an
You
action
gave to a
involved.
shul, and you're giving it to some guy, some street worker who's going to be pouring tar. You're giving it to some cement guy to, holy money for a temple, but that's the way it works. Of course, that's
Rabbi,
The direct
how
action,
is
there's a
that
direct
different
action.
from what I said before, that you
Now what?
can say that I will pay the $2 for another fruit in Jerusalem and donate that. I thought that's
No.
what you said. It's not
What you
right.
said is correct. But I'm just saying, on a personal level, don't do it yourself. If you go to Israel
But
now,
right now you're saying that you can do it.
of course, a person does it, and that's what the rabbis do in the stores in Israel. They do transfer it. I'm just saying, don't do it. You sounded like you were going to do it on a personal.
Just the rabbi can do it. You cannot.
No. Anyone can do it. Anyone can do it. You can do it also. But if you were to go to Israel now and want to buy produce, and what I was telling you was, don't buy produce from a store that doesn't have a supervision and say, I'll just fix it up. I'll just bring $1 to Jerusalem. Don't do that.
No. I said you buy a fruit in Jerusalem and donate that.
Right, but what I'm saying,
You cannot donate the money in Jerusalem. You have to buy a fruit and donate that in Jerusalem. But that's for people that live in Israel. It's not for somebody that's going to fly there,
Right. Okay. Very good. Yes. Okay. So my time is basically up, but I just want to spend another 2 minutes and try to just finish what we did yesterday. So we said one teaching is about deconsecrating the food, the produce here outside of Jerusalem, and the money was the holiness is transferred to the money, and then the money is used in Jerusalem. That was one teaching of Hilulim, which we're translating it as Chilulim to transfer and deconsecrate. The other lesson that we learned from that is that it applies to the vineyard, because it's used as the word Hilulim, praises, which means items that specifically are used to praise Hashem and during the temple consumption, and that is the songs that were done as praises during the wine libation in the temple and the altar. And so therefore, it only applies to wine according to this understanding. And those are the two teachings of Hilulim. So the Gemara is going to have a hard time figuring out how to say a blessing if you use the 2 times Hilulim for other things. So the Gemara says, well, the first thing the Gemara says is, it brings a source about saying praises on wine based on Migdash, and because it uses a term Mesameach Elokim, that wine makes Hashem happy. So that's the source that the Levites would sing in the temple. So anyway, so the point is, we have these 2 teachings. So the Gemara says that if we learn that the law of the 4th year applies to all produce, then we don't need that second Hilulim teaching that it only applies to the vineyard, to the vine, because this opinion says no, it applies to all produce. If it applies to all produce, then you don't need the Hilulim to teach you that it only applies to things that you say praises in the Beis Hamikdash. And if you follow that way of thinking, then you actually have an extra word, Hilulim, an extra teaching, and that you can use to teach you to recite a blessing. Now, the Gemara says, according to the opinion of that it does apply only to a vineyard, then you have a problem. But the Gemara said that there is a way out, that even if you learn that the only law of the 4th year, the only fruit that it applies to is the grapes, is the vineyard, you still might be able to have an extra word, Hilulim, because you might learn the source of the vineyard is not from the word Hilulim. The source that it only applies to the vine is from another source where it talks about produce from the vine And we have what's called a Gzeira Shava. There's a word where it talks about mixing, combining the seed from a grape with the seed from the grain and growing them together. And there it uses the same term, tevua, and it refers to the produce from the vine. Here also, it says the word tevua, and therefore it's gonna teach us that it only applies, that the law of the fourth year only applies to the vine. It doesn't apply to all types of fruits. And according to that, we have one of the hilulim extra, and we will learn the obligation to recite a bracha. Now, the Gemara is going to have a lot of questions on this. And one of the simple and obvious questions is that what do you do if you don't learn it from the Gzeira Shava, from the same word that it says regarding the mixture of grape and wheat? And what are you going to do if you don't follow that view? And if you do learn that it applies, that it teaches us the vine from the word hilulim, then you have no extra word to teach you a bracha. Another question that we'll have is that the whole concept of hilulim is all talking about the fourth year produce. Now that applies to stuff that grows on trees. What about eggs, fish, meat, chicken? What about all these other items that we recite brachas on, that we should be reciting brachas on? You're not going to be able to learn them from this hilulim. So we will be discussing a number of questions on this teaching, and it'll go back and forth a little further until we finally come to the conclusion of the Gemara that maybe on Thursday or Friday we'll get to. Okay, everyone, have a great day. We'll see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you, Rebbe.
Bye-bye. Thank you.